Welcome back to another video. It's been quite a while. Over quarantine, I've been working on the shed that I'm standing in right now. I'll show a quick shot of what it used to look like before. It was basically an empty garage. I had two garage doors for two cars to kind of come in, but it's extremely short. It's only about 10 feet, maybe more, in width. So over about 3 weeks during quarantine, I've been working on this shed, turning it into an indoor space. So I'm working on my plate business. I make 3D number plates and a lot of other personalized little big pieces. I had my machine out here, but it wasn't insulated, so I kind of wanted to insulate it and basically put a heater in so I could heat the place and stay in here, working here on the computer while watching the machine work. Kind of do everything from here instead of going back and forth from my house. So first thing I started with was poly bonding the floor. It was a concrete floor in here first, so basically it was really dusty. The poly bond is to basically like a PVA paste. You mix it in with water, and you brush it onto the whole ground. Once it's on the ground, it kind of holds that dust. I probably should have used a bit more. I bought a 1 meter tin, I think it was, and I think it's less than 200 square feet, this space. But when I ran out, the shops had already closed, so I couldn't get any more. I think all that insulation cost about €1,500. So for flooring, I went with 100mm insulation for the floor. Walls, I think it was 87.5mm, and then on the top I used kind of a roll. It was kind of a cheaper insulation because you're not really limited with space up there, so I done like 2-3 layers over the entire roof. For doing the ceiling, there was already existing beams going by as the room next to it is converted, but I had to add a wooden piece kind of in between the wooden frames that were going across, just for extra points to screw the plasterboard up and into the ceiling. About halfway down, I done it really good, and then the other end I got a bit lazier and didn't put as many up. But these are basically just points to kind of add spots where I could drill through the plasterboard to connect it to the ceiling. So once they were up, I could put in the plasterboard. I think it took 6 full sheets of plasterboard, and they're pretty big. We had to cut them in half, just because you couldn't lift them. There's only the 2 of us. It was a really good idea having the rigid foam floor insulation. We stacked them up kind of 6 high, and we were able to use them to kind of stand on the ground and be able to kind of reach up and hold it on the ceiling. They're really heavy, so once we kind of got it up, we screwed it in place as fast as we could. But that was pretty easy. We didn't stagger it at the start, but later on I did stagger them down the other end. That was kind of one of the bigger problems that I was one of the kind of things I forgot when I was doing this build, was little bits like that. That's why I wanted to film this now, so I can go back over my mistake. The reason you do stagger it as well is just to give it more strength. You don't want board by board kind of connecting and all the lines kind of meeting. Once all the plasterboard was up on the roof, I went to frame the front wall off this garage. As the front wall was 2 garage doors, I needed to put a framing up there. This back wall was already framed. It's like a plywood wall. Then the wall to my right and to my left are concrete walls. But the wall to my front, there's nothing there. It's just 2 roll down garage doors. So I had to do wooden framing. That was pretty easy. Like, I kind of just guessed how much wood I would need. I done one piece all on the ground. I think it was about 60 centimeters apart. I put a beam coming down, and they screwed in the top and they screwed in down at the bottom. This is just for the plasterboard, the insulated plasterboards I was using to screw onto. Probably should have spaced them out a bit differently, as when I went to put in the insulated plasterboard, they weren't really meeting, and I had to add in extra pieces of wood going sideways between the 2 beams to screw into. Similar to what I'd done with the ceiling before I'd done the plasterboard up there. I was able to add it on the outside though, because I have access by sliding up the black garage door on that side, so it wasn't too bad. Then for the insulation on the walls, I went with an insulated plasterboard, and just because it kind of like, they are pretty expensive, but it kind of gives you the best value for like space wise, and it didn't take up much space. They're 87.5mm in thickness, so I think that's 70mm insulation and 12.5mm thick off the actual plasterboard. I went with the insulated plasterboard as well because I didn't want to plaster the entire wall. I was going to seam down the centers between the boards, and just kind of something a bit simpler. I wouldn't try plastering the entire wall, so this was the option I went with. So for connecting to the wall, I just drilled through, I think it was 8mm holes using a masonry drill bit that went all the way through. I had to buy a pretty big one. Originally I was kind of marking the holes, taking the board down, drilling the holes, but I got a bigger drill bit in the end, went all the way through, and then I used these metal plugs. They're actually really handy. You just put them in place, hammer them in, and they hold it in. You just have to drill the hole the same width as that, and it kind of basically self tightens itself in. It's not sort of like screws or anything. Plasterboards, they basically done the entire outer walls here. This back wall, nothing was done to this really because it was already insulated in it. So the insulated plasterboards were used on the 2 concrete walls, and they were used on the front wall as well. The front wall I used long wood screws to go through the wall into the wooden framing, and then on the concrete walls I used the metal plugs. When I was installing the insulated plasterboards as well, I had to bring some electrics into the room. There are sockets over to my right which had to come into the room. I could have run that piping down on the inside, but I'm not an electrician, so I didn't really want to do that. All I did was take the screws out that they had that went into the concrete wall and put them basically onto the plasterboard, and I kept the plastic tubing that they had down the outside. I didn't want to kind of insulate it in behind the plasterboard because I wasn't sure how it would react with kind of plant insulation bit around it, whether it would get too hot and cause a fire. And then to the room, same with the lights up top, they were handy. They were just screwed into the beam that was above, so I just unscrewed that and done it through the plasterboard and brought the lights into the room as well. But when all the electrics were into the room as well, there were some small gaps up on the top, kind of over the insulation boards, just little pieces, just because I'm not that accurate with doing certain things. It's my first time doing this, so I got foam insulation, so I used that just for little cracks up the top. There were some tiny little ones because the floor wasn't completely even, and I was pretty lucky that these boards perfectly fit from the ground to the ceiling. So when the ground was a little bit off, there was a tiny little gap down some sides, to the left or to the right of a full board. So the spray foam insulation just went up there, and then I used a saw just to cut it off after it had dried. And that stuff was pretty easy to use, and it was handy just to get rid of any drafts or anything that I might get. For the floor, as I said, I used 100 millimeters rigid foam insulation. I wanted to do a floating floor. I didn't want to make joists, mainly because you have a lot of heat you can lose down through the joists. As like when a joist frame is here, you'll just have terminal bridging where you'll lose heat through, which I think is a bit stupid. So it's kind of like, my understanding of it was better to just do a floating floor, or just a continuous seam of flooring insulation. Below that I did put down a kind of a moisture membrane. I think one was put down underneath the concrete before the concrete was poured in, because it's inside in there as well. It's a kind of an inside room. But I just wanted to do it again just in case there wasn't one underneath the concrete. And I wanted to stop any more dust coming up as well, because I didn't put too much polybond on the concrete below. So that was underneath the 100mm insulation. The 100mm insulation went down really easy, really fast. Taped it together with the foil tape. Once those flooring insulation boards were down, they were done pretty fast. After that, OSB boards were put on top of that. That was going to be my subflooring. And the OSB boards were 18mm thick, and they were tongue and grooved. So I basically put wood glue in the tongue and groove and pushed them together. I didn't stagger them. This is probably the most important thing that I should have staggered, because the floor gets a lot of use and all that sort of thing. Then the first side, I just put them one after each other. But then when I got over to this way, I faced them the other way, and I did start to stagger them when I realized what I had done wrong. But I had already wood glued them, and it was only the next day that I noticed, so I couldn't really separate them and start again. So that is probably the one thing that I probably should have done. But since the flooring is completely finished now, there's no squeaks or any noises there was when it was just the OSB floor. Once my OSB floors were down, I went back onto the walls, and the walls up to this point are just insulated plasterboard. So they look all right. You have a lot of screws going through different points. So in the ceiling, the plasterboard up there are like probably a couple of hundred screws going through to the ceiling above, through the wooden beams. Then through the insulated boards that are against the wall, they have the metal plugs, and in the front there's loads of wood screws going through to the frame around there. So my idea was, I was not plasterer, so I didn't want to plaster the entire wall. So I got 25 kg I think bag of this filler. So the filler is meant to just go between joints, and then you can paint over it, and you can paint the plasterboard as well. So you paint the plaster that you've put in between the boards and the actual plasterboards themselves as well. So I went over the whole thing. It was pretty easy to do this to the kind of plugs and the screw holes. You just kind of dab a little bit over, and that was fine. The harder parts were the joints, as they were pretty deep. When you have two of these plasterboards, they kind of come in before they meet. So you have a big a decent amount, probably like 2-3 centimeters that you need to fill in with this filler. And I don't think it's really set. I don't think it's really meant for that much. For that as well, I put down tape as well to stop any cracking between those boards. But it did take a while to get the filler built up in those joints, and probably took about 2-3 days. I'd have to do one day, let it dry for a day, next day do another layer. I had 3 layers of plaster on those joints. But once that was done, it was just sanding for about 3-4 days straight. It kind of took a while, just patience wise, feathering it around the plaster that I've put up with the board to make sure that when it's painted, you don't get any marks or kind of serious being able to see, oh, that's where the joint is on those plaster boards. The screws were perfect. They were really easy to do. The harder parts again was the joints between the actual boards, as there was so much plaster I put in there. I eventually bought a motorized sander to do it kind of a bit faster, but that was easy enough. It wasn't too bad. As well, when you're sanding the filler, I'd make sure you don't have any like equipment or anything in the room. The dust, and you have to wear a respirator, definitely. Like I wore one, it was a 3M one, it's a pretty good one, but the dust that comes off that is so fine. It got on a lot of like my speaker and stuff I had in the room playing music. It kind of got in all the cracks of that. But I was lucky I had the mask, and when I was doing the ceiling I always wore goggles just because you have that stuff falling down, it gets in your eyes, it's so fine, that dust. For the outside, if you can imagine what this looks like when you roll up those doors, actually I'll put a shot in here as well. It's kind of those wooden beams kind of going up that I've used for framing, and is the back of the insulation. That insulation on the back, I don't think it's really weather proof, and it might be moisture proof, but on my side, like when I open that door, I don't want the insulation getting wet if there's rain or anything. So we had some old plywood squares. They were 600 by 600, 600 by 600 millimeters. They were scrapped, they were going out in the bin, so I just got all them and screwed them in place on the board. And actually, it was really cool, kind of nice design. You can see the lines going one way and then another way on other boards, and that worked out really well. I done them on a door as well. I kind of lost the footage to how I made the door, but it's basically just a square wooden frame I made with the same, I think it was like 2x4 wood that I used for the framing at the front, and I kind of put joints in at the top between the straights either way. And then I just screwed on a piece of the insulated plasterboard and then 2 hinges on the other side. So the door on this garage on the inside looks flush with the wall, and there are gaps down the right hand side. But yeah, and then I done like a push bar on the inside. So you push the thing, and there's a magnet actually as well, that's how it opens. There's a handle on the outside which I put there, but the handle, you don't pull it down, you don't push it down and pull the door, you just pull it. There's a magnet up the top from an old speaker that I took out of a speaker as I didn't have one. During quarantine I had to kind of improvise with certain things because I couldn't get everything I needed. And then for the piece of metal, it's an old gym equipment bar that's kind of screwed onto the door. So the metal, so the magnet is on the actual frame of the building, and then on the door is screwed metal bar. So when you close the door, it hits as a magnet. You only need to pull it gently enough, and then push it gently enough as well, and it opens, which is pretty cool. But yeah, for the outside, those plywood things, those plywood sheets worked really well. They look really nice as well, so I don't have to kind of pull down the shutter when I close the door. It's kind of protected by the plywood reasonably against any sort of light rain. If it's lashing out raining, I'm gonna pull down the shutter when I come into the garage. When all those walls were sanded down, then I went on to paint. I probably didn't buy enough paint, but then again, like everything with this, I wasn't able to get any more materials once I started due to quarantine. So it was a matte white paint I've used on all the walls. It was actually really good for new plaster. I think it was 1 large tub, I'm not sure what size there, after 25 or 50 litre. But that done the entire place. I probably could need a second coat on certain parts of the ceiling, but the walls, you can't see any of the seams or the screws where they are. And then for this back wall here, I didn't want to put plasterboard on it. I have to pay to plasterboard an entire wall. I did have a wallpaper before, and I actually found the wallpaper really easy to do. So I picked this stuff up. I think it was €30 for the entire wall, 3 rolls, and then all the paste to do it, that was pretty cheap, like probably the same price as the paint. It's kind of metallic-y. I didn't really realize that. It's rose gold. I thought it was going to be like a matte finish, but it is a little sparkly when you can look at it a certain way, so it can look a little bit girly. But I think it actually looks pretty cool. I like the kind of design on one wall and then the white on everything else. So for the floor, I went with a laminate. I was same as everything else, quarantine, I knew it was kind of coming, so I went to Woodies and it was like the cheapest underlay you can get. I think it was €25 for a 25-meter roll. That done the whole shed here, and then I got their kind of one up from their cheapest laminate floor. I liked it because it was kind of grey. We don't really have that in our house, so it kind of looks a little bit different. And it was really easy to put down the laminate, like it literally just clicks in together. One thing I did remember to stagger the boards here. So the first board that went down was on the first row was a full board. Then I started the next row with a board that's been cut in half. So I just put half the board at the top, then I go full board, and put the other half of the first one down the other end. These boards as well fit the floor perfectly. There's just a couple of millimeters down at either end gap for it to expand, and that fit really well. I did run out of flooring, so I'm a box short, still waiting for Woodies to open back up again so I can finish this side over here. That's why I'm not showing that's why I'm not showing full shots of the entire garage. I still have to put flooring down on that side, and I still have to put the skirting board down there as well. The skirting board I made myself. I didn't buy any before quarantine, so I had to make some myself as well. And this white MDF, so I cut it up into strips, thicker ones for the skirting board than the bottom, and then thinner ones for up top. It worked out okay. It was cheap. It was like €8 to do the whole thing, because those sheets are really cheap. But I probably will take them down and put something else up in the future. But for the moment, not too bad. It covers up the joints at the top, and as I didn't plaster between like kind of corners, I've just left them bare, so I have a skirting board kind of sitting on to kind of cover it up. So yeah, that's the garage. It's a lot better and it holds a lot of heat. The station I've put in is pretty high standard. I think like 100mm for the walls, or 100mm for the floor, 70mm for the walls, and then up top I use that kind of cheap rollout insulation. But I got 4 lots of it, 4 kind of big rolls of it. The amount of insulation I put up there, that was probably one of the most miserable things I had to do. When I started it, I was kind of doing it as I put the plastic board up, but then at the end I left one little square and I had to climb up and have it all passed up to me and kind of do it all over the entire roof. And it took a couple of hours, like just breathing up there. I had a respirator on, but I could hardly breathe, and just it was so hot up there. But at the moment it's holding heat really well. It looks a lot better. It's easy. It's great being able to work with the machine in the room, have the computer, everything set up. So yeah, I'll probably be doing a bit more on the outside where those garage door slides up on the left. There's a bit of wasted space, but that much, so I'm going to put shelving, have power washer, all cleaning products for the cars. That sort of thing is going to be class having that there. At the moment they're like in a different shed on a shelving, you can't even get to them. So it's going to be cool when I do that. I'll probably have that in a later video. That's it for this video. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up. And if you have any questions of what I used, how I've done different things, how I've done things, leave them down in the comments. I was really happy with how this turned out. It turned out a lot better than I thought it was going to. And it didn't cost too much. Like $1,500 is probably a lot, some people are thinking. But I could only buy online, like I'm not a tradesperson, and I paid VAT on everything that I ordered as well. So that's it for this video, and I'll see you in the next one.